We introduced also a dispatch operator licensing system, and for that system what is required is an accessible booking system, complaint system as mentioned earlier, that the actual dispatch operator would manage the complaint system, and also records to be kept by the dispatch operator of all the drivers that are affiliated to them in terms of records of the vehicles, the insurance details, the drivers and the driver licences as well. We also introduced a wheelchair accessible register of licences. So all wheelchair accessible vehicles, which when they get a licence at first, they get it at a reduced rate, so they must give priority to people with disabilities. We have a register of licences which we hand out to people with disabilities, and we actually have disability groups who do some mystery shopping for us to ensure that these vehicles give, first of all, priority to people with disabilities. Of course, yes, they can do able-bodied bookings as well, but they must give priority to people with disabilities. And we also have joint administration then of the driver licensing system with An Garda Síochána, which is our police force. They currently remain the licensing authority, but we will be taking that over from them in the future, except obviously, of course, for the vetting of drivers. In terms of compliance, in 2007 we recruited a dedicated enforcement team for the first time in Ireland, who work closely with other enforcement agencies, but it was the first time ever that we had a dedicated enforcement team. We only have 9 officers. They work 24/7 and they travel right around the country, and they engage in many operations at taxi ranks and also relative to complaints that we might receive. And to make things easier, I suppose, on the court service, we introduced a fixed charge penalty system whereby our enforcement officers can dish out quite hefty fines, €250 for 22 different penalties we have. But this was also to assist our court service in not clogging up the system with a huge amount of what we would, I suppose, call small prosecutions. We do have a national prosecution function, and we try and limit our prosecutions to unlicensed drivers, unlicensed vehicles and overcharging. And we've many joint operations with other enforcement agencies, so we have many Irish Police joint operations where we would have joint operations with, let's say, the Revenue Commissioners, Department of Social Protection, Customs and the police and ourselves. So we'll all get together in one foul swoop and do a joint operation, which have been very, very effective. We also have taken over consumer complaints. The Irish Police used to deal with consumer complaints. We took over those in 2006, so we investigate all complaints. There are 4 types of complaints that we can investigate, which is the condition and cleanliness of the car, driver behaviour, overcharging and other matters relating to hiring, which could be, for instance, where a booking is made through a dispatch operator and maybe the vehicle may not turn up. We also collect and disseminate statistical data relating to compliance levels in the industry in Ireland. So the data collection and information provision, we have an industry information line for the whole industry, and that keeps us very, very busy because taxi drivers like to talk. They like to call us regularly about all the various different reforms that we're doing, and also for information about licensing and administrative arrangements. We also have a consumer hotline as well, and again, consumers who wish to make complaints or wish to commend service can get onto that hotline, and we give them plenty of information. We have industry and consumer information guides and publications, and a lot of them are available on our website. So we've got quite a detailed website with consumer industry publications, the online public register that I mentioned earlier, and we also have an online fare estimator, which is very, very beneficial for consumers who can get a possible, taxi estimate before they go out on a journey. We have in-vehicle information for consumers displayed in all vehicles, and again there's samples out there on the display desk which basically gives details of the taxi fare. It also gives the rights and responsibilities of the consumer and the rights and responsibilities of the driver, so what you can actually expect as part of your journey and who you should contact if you have a complaint. We also do regulatory impact assessments before we obviously introduce any new regulations. And one of the things we're doing at the moment, we have a fairly large-scale project going on at the moment relative to taxi rank planning guidelines for local authorities, and that's about the whole planning into the draft development plans for transport for the future to include taxis into those plans. And again, we have statistical data on industry in Ireland collated, and we distribute it as required. So in terms of quality standards, there are, I suppose, the 2 major things and probably the 2 major issues for the industry. Sorry, I didn't move on there. The two major issues, I suppose, for the industry since we've started reforming the industry are the introduction of the quality standards. And the two things that we're introducing in terms of quality standards are vehicle standards and driver standards. So we published vehicle standards in 2007, and that's in terms of the vehicle age, the vehicle condition, and the basic vehicle specifications. So we've got separate specifications in terms of standard vehicles, and then we've got new specifications as well for wheelchair accessible vehicles, all being rolled out over the next 2-year period. In terms of drivers then, we've rolled out a new skills development programme for the industry, which was mandatory for all new drivers joining the industry from 2009, and it's now being rolled out to all incumbents by 2012. So this includes rules operating in the industry, consumer good customer service, good business practice, equality and diversity, map reading skills, staying safe. The industry knowledge section is the part that the incumbents will have to undertake. We are, I suppose, allowing them not to undertake the geographical knowledge, which is something that they would have done many years ago when they joined the industry. So, introduction of quality standards for existing operators, we fast-tracked that from 2010 to 2012. We did an economic review of the industry in 2008, and following the publication in 2009, we had a public consultation process about whether we should fast-track some of the quality standards for the industry. So for wheelchair accessible licences only, we decided to introduce wheelchair accessible licences only from 2010, and that's to try and increase the portion of the fleet that's wheelchair accessible and to have the provision of accessible services available to all consumers. We also looked at the non-transferability of taxi licences into the future to reduce second-hand market activity, and that's because we are now issuing wheelchair accessible licences only, and we don't want to go back to the situation where standard licences would then become valuable again, and then if we have to relook at it, we'd find ourselves back in the situation where drivers would find themselves, like earlier I mentioned, when the market was deregulated, they might end up with a worthless licence. So whilst transferability of current taxi licences is now restricted from now on, obviously drivers who have a licence at the moment would have that legitimate expectation that they could transfer their licence once, so we are permitting them to transfer it once more. We've introduced a 9-year age rule for standard taxis and hackneys, and this has been fast-tracked to next year, and as a result of that next year, we're already seeing activity in the changing of vehicles this year, and a number of people have changed their vehicles this year in the standard taxis and hackneys already to 4- and 5-year-old vehicles, so we see that investment already starting in terms of quality. And the 9-year age rule then for change of vehicle for incumbents, if they were changing their vehicle this year, as I mentioned, we can see the trend already in newer vehicles. And incumbent then drivers to undertake the skills development programme, fast track to be undertaken by all drivers by 2012. We are getting a little bit of resistance from the industry to undertake this training, but we're trying to bring them in gently by providing a copy of our manual and also a free test by the end of this year. So just in terms of research and consultation, since the Commission was established in 2004, we did a number of research programmes and consultation processes. So in 2005, we did a national review of vehicle standards and services of the industry in Ireland and a public consultation on the proposals for change before we introduced any reviews at the outset. We obviously had a public consultation process on the national taximeter area and taxi fares before we nationalised the taximeter area and the fare as well. We also had the public consultation process on the vehicle standards prior to the publication, again, of the standards which were rolled out from 2007. And we also had a public consultation process on the national maximum fare in 2008. Again, we said we'd review it every 2 years. We put the new fare in place in 2006. We reviewed it again in 2008. There was an increase in 2008 because there was an increase in taxi operating and running costs. However, in 2010, for the fare review this year, we found that costs have stayed much the same, so there's been no increase in the fare. And then, as I mentioned earlier, in 2009 we had a public consultation following an economic review of the industry on the impact of liberalisation of the market. So our decision making then following consultation, we carefully consider all submissions received, and we received quite a number of submissions from various stakeholders. We kind of have quite an onerous consultation process before we make any decisions. We meet with stakeholders nationally, so we meet policy stakeholders and we spend quite a bit of time meeting industry stakeholders. We've got kind of 4 main unions in the Dublin area, and then we've got local associations right around the country representing taxi, hackney and limousine drivers. We also have an advisory council to the Commission which we consult with before we make any decisions, and that's a body set up under our primary legislation to advise both the Commission and the Minister on issues pertaining to small public service vehicles. And we have quite a wide representative people on that particular advisory council, which includes about 18 people in total, but about 6 representatives of the industry, and then we have local authorities, the police force, consumers, people with disabilities, business, tourism, competition authority and road safety authority representatives. Also, prior to making any decisions, we also carry out a full regulatory impact assessment, looking at the options for change in terms certainly of benefits and in terms of costs. So the effects of liberalisation and the establishment of the regulatory system on consumers, it's been very, very beneficial for consumers. They've got shorter and often no waiting times. When you go out, particularly in Dublin at the moment, you only go outside the door and you see taxis everywhere. So if you want a taxi, you'll get a taxi immediately. We've now got a new national and easy to understand fare structure, and we've got a lot of consumer services available from the Commission in terms of the complaints and accommodation process that I mentioned earlier, the dedicated enforcement line, in-vehicle information displayed, and also the informed website. Telephone bookings are now the preferred method of hiring, so it's interesting to see in Dublin. When you go to Dublin at the moment, you'll see a lot of the taxi ranks that are full of taxis, and a lot of the taxis that are driving around the streets looking for work. However, all of the research has shown that, in fact, telephone bookings are the preferred, method, particularly from the consumer's perspective at the moment. And the most recent research we have is that 63% retain services by telephone, whilst only 37% retain services on the street. Peak demand, then 85% of our trips take place between Thursday and Saturday, so really around the social period. So most of our day trips then from Monday to Thursday are really, business trips which will be taken during that time.